What happens when over 8,000 African professionals, doctors, engineers, teachers, choose to leave the West, not because they were pushed out, but because something deeper pulled them home, when the choice is no longer about staying for comfort, but returning for purpose? It began quietly, a speech broadcast not across continents, but into hearts, a voice that didn't command but called, from dusty fields to abandoned clinics, from shuttered schools to silent villages. They came back. Among them was a belief, steady and simple, that home could be built better by its own. At the center of it all, a young leader stood not with promises, but with a question. What if we returned? Not just our bodies, but our brilliance. His name is Ibrahim Trayor. And this is the story of what followed. Stay with us, because what you're about to see might just change the way you think about Africa. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're new here, subscribe. You'll want to follow this all the way through. The ground crew is overwhelmed. Planes aren't arriving on schedule anymore. They're overlapping. Immigration lines wrap around the terminal, not from bureaucracy, but from sheer numbers. These aren't chaotic travelers. These are professionals, focused, silent. A few are trembling. Many are crying. One little girl clutches her father's hand and asks, "Is this really home?" He kneels and nods. "Yes, and we're here to fix it together." Inside the crowd is Dr. Haleli Masori. For 11 years, she practiced neurology in Paris, but she hasn't smiled like this in a decade. In her duffel bag, redesigned specs. In her heart, a promise she made to her dying aunt, who never got treatment in time. No, Birkin should die just because they were born far from machines. She says softly to herself. Near her, Zachary Barrow closes his laptop. He's already running diagnostics on the airport's outdated digital system. He spent 7 years at Microsoft in Seattle, but never got used to winter, or to the way people looked at his skin in high-end boardrooms. He taps into the airport's Wi-Fi, and with a few commands, starts patching a firewall vulnerability. He smiles. Back online, he mutters. President Tree doesn't make a speech. He doesn't wave. He walks quiet, watchful, every step measured. Around him, returnees begin to chant softly, not his name, but a phrase. We believe. Reporters try to approach. He raises one sage hand. No headlines today. Just homecoming. A team of young soldiers and medical volunteers organize arrival stations. Each person gets a welcome kit, housing instructions, land claim, documents, health screening, and a government ID with one bold word stamped across the top, routine. That word carries weight. In the West, many of these professionals were immigrants, foreigners, or worse, refugees. Here, they are pillars of national rebirth. Outside the terminal, a massive red banner flaps above a newly constructed facility, Burkina Faso Medical and Tech Academy, built by the Diaspora for the Tech Academy. Future, dozens of young students, most from rural villages, gather in awe. They've only read about these kinds of people. Now they're here, smiling, shaking hands, ready to teach. A local grandmother approaches one of the returnees, unsure. You speak Murray? She asks softly. He nods. I never forgot. She places a small calabash bowl in his hand filled with peanuts. Then you are one of us. Across the capital, news spreads like fire. Radios blast the headline. 000 professionals have returned. Doctors, engineers, farmers, coders. WhatsApp groups explode. One message reads, "This is not a government stunt. This is real. They came back and they're staying." But not everyone is smiling. In a quiet office, 2 European embassy officials look at the arrival stats. This is a problem. One whispers, if they stay, this could shift everything. We've trained them, paid them, built systems around them. The other replies coldly, then maybe we should have given them a reason to stay. Back at the airport, a Burkinab journalist asks one returnee, why leave 6F-figure jobs? Why leave New York, London, Toronto? The answer is simple, Raf, because we don't want our children to grow up building someone else's dream. It's time to build ours. And so the streets begin to change. Pharmacies open overnight. Clinics expand. Solar panels get installed. Engineering tools arrive in crates marked with returning names. One child walks into a library and finds a new section Diaspora contributions. Inside is a photo of the day the first 800 came home. Below it, a quote. They didn't come to take. They came to return what was always theirs. As night falls, the president finally speaks on national radio, his voice low and clear. We are not rebuilding what colonization destroyed. We are building what they never wanted us to dream. Silence follows, then music, then hope. But in the shadow of that joy, foreign powers begin to whisper, because if one nation can bring back 8,000 of its best minds, what happens when the entire continent hears the call? Rewind 48 hours. The night was still. No fireworks, no press teasers, just a national broadcast. Unannounced, beginning with static. Then his face appeared, calm, centered, unshaken. Captain Ibrahim Trayor sat behind a plain desk. No flags, no military medals, only a small carved map of Burkina Faso beside him. He spoke with the clarity of someone who had waited his whole life to say what was coming. We don't need donations, he began, voice measured. We need you, all of you. A pause. Then he leaned forward. You, the son working at a hospital in Brussels. You, the daughter developing tech in Atlanta. You, the mother raising Burkina Faso children in Oslo. We see you, and we truly need you here. Now, across the world, screen lit up, phones buzzed. In cafes in Paris, the Burkina Faso community turned to their heads. In Berlin, students paused their lectures. In New York, one nurse on a night shift stopped mid-injection, turned the volume up, and whispered, "Is this really real?" Trayor continued, "Our land is rich, but wealth buried is not wealth lived. And who better to unearth it than our very own? We are not asking for your pity. We are calling for your purpose. You have the tools. We have the soil. Come home. No music, no applause, just silence." But in that silence, a storm began. In a high-rise apartment in Toronto, a software architect named Bukari Diawara stood up, shut his laptop, and stared at the screen. His wife asked, "Are you quitting now?" He nodded. "Yes, we're going home finally." In Lyon, a medical student named Fatou Billy played the clip again and again. Her friends told her to calm down. She didn't. Instead, she opened a group chat. Mission return. In 6 hours, it had 300 members. In Bamako, a mechanic forwarded the speech to his cousin in Italy. That cousin had never considered going back, but by midnight, he was already looking up flight prices. The phrase, "We need you," exploded across TikTok, Instagram, Telegram. Influencers who never talked about politics reposted the clip with captions like, "This one hit deep," and "First time a president made me cry." Truly in Washington State Department, analysts flagged the video. Amemorit, unpreed, diaspora mobilization, potential shift in skilled migration flows, but it was already too late. By morning, WhatsApp groups had changed names. Burkina Homerant, come home and build roots before riches. Return portals on the government site crashed from traffic, and Trey hadn't even said the most powerful line. Yet, it came at the end, quiet, almost like a whisper. They told, "You Africa is hard, but I tell you, Africa is waiting." That line didn't inspire. It ignited. At a train station in London, a young architect named Samuri Koulibaly skipped his connection. Instead, he sat down on a bench and applied for Burkina Faso's mission, Renaissance program. That same day, he received an email confirming his eligibility. Just weeks later, he was on a flight home. The government hadn't planned for this speed. They expected a few dozen applications, maybe 100 in the first month. Instead, over 2,000 arrived. In 72 hours, engineers, surgeons, teachers, cyber analysts, not out of desperation, but it's out of love. One applicant wrote, "I spent 15 years trying to be accepted abroad. I'd rather spend 15 building my own soil now." Another added, "My degree was framed in gold, but my father still couldn't get medicine back home." That ends now. Finally, across Burkina Faso villages, radios replayed the speech with translation into local languages. Elders sat in circles, nodding slowly. One man said, "I never thought I'd see the day when leaving wasn't the dream. But coming back was, meanwhile, in foreign universities. Professors noticed a shift. Bright African students once eager to stay began asking about transfer options. One university dean privately asked his colleague, "What if they all go back just like that?" Not everyone was pleased. In Brussels, a policy round on African development broke into debate. One participant warned, "If this return movement grows, it will destabilize our sectors." Another replied, "Maybe it's not destabilization, maybe it's justice." Finally, back in Ouagadougou, Trayor met with his team. His advisors were still processing the response. One said, "Sir, this might really change everything." He responded with a firm nod. "That's the point." They began drafting support packages, legal protections, and infrastructure plans for the returnees. Schools were prepared to receive children who didn't speak Mai or Dula. Hospitals were given hiring priority lists. And at the center of it all, a map marked not with borders, but with opportunity zones. The first return flight was scheduled for the following week. It filled in 24 hours, then a second, then a third. And each time the question was asked, "Why are they coming?" the answer never changed because one man spoke and the world truly listened. Do you believe Trayor's message can reshape a nation? Comment amen below if you stand with him. The next part of this story won't be told by presidents or policies. It will be told by those boarding planes with nothing but a suitcase and a belief, those who walked away from comfort and into the unknown because they heard something no one else had said to them in years. You are wanted, you are needed, you belong, and now they are coming. The question is, who's next? 2 days after the speech, the official announcement hit national radio. The government of Burkina Faso had launched a bold initiative, Mission Renaissance. It wasn't a campaign. It wasn't a plea. It was a plan, a full-scale state-backed program for welcoming Burkina Faso professionals back from abroad, not just as returnees, but as partners in rebuilding the country. The program offered free land grants in development zones, priority job placements in public sectors, reintegration package, including housing, assistance, tuition coverage for children, and national recognition of foreign qualifications. The first press release was 1 page long. At the bottom of it, Trayor's signature appeared next to a single line of text. They trained you to leave. We prepared to receive within hours. The Ministry of Infrastructure received over 600 applications. By the next morning, doctors, engineers, IT experts, agricultural scientists, and even former military officers had begun to submit dosas. Some had left 30 years ago. Others had never even lived in Burkina Faso, only carried it in their names. Now they were returning with skills, experience, and in many cases, capital. Western outlets were quick to respond. A headline in a London newspaper read, "Burkina Faso launches idealistic homecoming program." Another in Paris asked, "Can passion replace policy?" Television analysts called it unsustainable. A round table in Washington suggested that the loss of African professionals might destabilize global talent markets. But the government wasn't listening to them. They were listening to the returnees. At a televised event, Minister of Labor, Cardi Tamogo, stood beside 5 new arrivals. An aerospace engineer from Houston, a trauma nurse from Lyon, a financial planner from Toronto, a soil researcher from Amsterdam, and a renewable energy technician from Oslo. Cameras rolled as she handed each of them a welcome certificate, a national ID, and a symbolic piece of clay from the region where they'd been granted land. "You are not guests," she said with conviction. "You are home now fully and truly." The most powerful moment came when a young mother stepped to the microphone. Her name was Rakia Tapsoba. She had been living in Germany for 12 years working as a midwife. In perfect German accented French, she said, "My child was born abroad, but I want her to grow up in a place where her skin is not a reason to be watched, where her name is not shortened for someone's convenience, where her presence is expected, not constantly explained away." The applause lasted 4 minutes. Meanwhile, ministries across the government began mobilizing. The Ministry of Health released a list of over 120 priority hospital posts. The Ministry of Agriculture made tractors and irrigation equipment available to return farmers at cost. The Ministry of Technology launched a digital portal where coders and system architects could directly pitch projects to national agencies. For the first time in the country's history, the return of the diaspora wasn't treated as a favor. It was treated as national strategy. One by one, the names began to pour in. Familiar names. Famous ones. Dr. Noel Damber, a neurosurgeon with publications in Harvard Medical Review. Yasmin Orago, the first Burkina woman to lead a logistics firm in Dubai. Idris Sori, the youngest African ever hired as a lead robotics engineer at Tesla. All submitted applications. When asked by foreign press why they were giving up six-figure salaries, many answered the same way: because no job abroad will ever mean more than coming home and making something that actually lasts. Inside government halls, some worried about backlash. Would this strain resources? Would people reject the returnees as outsiders or privileged? But the opposite happened. Communities began organizing welcome meals. Rural villages offered plots of land near schools. Imams and priests gave blessings. One elderly farmer even gave his old shovel to a young agricultural specialist who had just returned from Sweden. "My hands are tired," he said gently. "Yours are just beginning now and full of strength." It didn't take long before other African nations took notice. News reports from Mali and Gay, Togo showed similar movements. Forming WhatsApp groups with names like Ghana Rebuild and Return to Nairobi appeared overnight. A Nigerian journalist tweeted, "What Traore is doing is not just for Burkina Faso, it's for all of us, the entire continent." And yet the opposition continued. An AU development consultant posted a public critique. Burkina Faso cannot absorb this many brave professionals without creating economic imbalance. Trayor responded in a radio interview, calm and firm. "We're not absorbing them. We are returning them to where they were always truly needed." The camera panned to the faces of a classroom full of Burkinab children, watching doctors teach in their village for the first time. No one interrupted. No one laughed because something impossible was happening. The best and brightest were not leaving Africa. They were coming back. And now, with the systems in motion and the movement growing, the challenge ahead was not about whether the return was real. It was about whether the world could truly handle what a united, educated, and empowered Africa might actually build. For 11 years, Dr. Halle was one of the top neurosurgeons at Opel PTA Salatria in Paris, fluent in French, German, and English, trained at Sorbonne, respected in every hospital she walked into. Her office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seine with framed degrees and awards lining the walls. She had everything a career could promise except peace. The decision came quietly. One evening, after performing a successful procedure on a young girl with a brain tumor, Hale Lima sat in the staff lounge watching a replay of President Trayor's speech on her phone. "We don't need donations. We need you," he had said. But it wasn't the words that broke her. It was the silence that followed. For the first time in her career, she felt her heartbeat line up perfectly with a mission. She didn't tell her colleagues right away, not until she submitted her resignation. Some tried to stop her. Her department head even offered her a promotion. "You'll have your own wing," he said, your name in gold on the plaque front and center. But Hale Lima just smiled and replied, "I don't need gold. I need grounding and purpose." Packing up her apartment in the Fifth Arrondissement took only a weekend. Her neighbors stared as she loaded medical textbooks into suitcases. One asked if she was taking a sabbatical. "No," she answered. "I'm taking my soul back home where it belongs." She arrived in Bobo, Dasso, with one suitcase, 3 laptops, and a vision she'd been carrying since childhood: the creation of the country's first specialized trauma and neurorehabilitation center. The land had already been granted under Mission Renaissance. It sat on the edge of a district where injuries were common, but treatment was rare. Locals had long accepted slow death or travel abroad as their only options. Hale Lima changed that. In the first 72 hours, she toured old clinics, met with village leaders, and drew up plans with Burkina Bay architects. Her first hire was a young nurse named Nini Tambura, who had been working out of a cramped metal shed with no electricity. "Are you sure that you want to work with me?" Nina asked, embarrassed by her worn shoes and outdated tools. Helma just said, "I've worked in the finest buildings, but healing doesn't need glass walls. It needs heart and hands that care." Construction began 2 weeks later. The center was designed with local climate in mind. Open air corridors, solar-powered AC, water filtration, and trauma triage zones built using modular design. Every bed was placed facing a window. Every chart was printed in French and more. Donations came, but only from Burkina Faso and citizens. Helma refused international aid. We build what we own, and we own what we build, she stated clearly. Her colleagues in France were stunned when she posted the first image of the half-built center. A reply came from her old supervisor. You're wasting your talent. She replied with a photo of a child walking again after spinal rehab. Caption: no talent is wasted when it's finally used for the right people and purpose. 3 months in, the center saw a first patient, a motorcycle accident survivor named Umar Tungara. He had been told he'd never walk again. Halim and her team treated him for 4 weeks. On the 5th, he stood up and took 3 full steps. Someone recorded it and uploaded it with the title Burkina Faso's First Step Toward Healing. The video went viral. 2 million views in 72 hours. Celebrities reposted it. African health influencers shared her name. But what mattered more to Halima was the knock at her door the next morning. It was Umar's mother holding a small bag of ground nuts. You brought my son back, she said softly. This is all I have to offer. Halima took it with both hands. This is all I need truly. The center now operates with a wait list. Patients come from as far as Ghana and Mali. Helma trains young doctors during the day and reads patient journals at night. She's developing a certification program in neurot trauma, specifically tailored for African emergency conditions. Snake bites, mine injuries, untreated epilepsy. It's the first of its kind on the continent. She was recently offered a prestigious grant by a European foundation to expand. She declined. If you want to support us, she said firmly, send your students here to learn with us. We don't export our hope anymore. We teach it right here. Her story has inspired others. 2 more doctors have returned. 1 from Johannesburg, 1 from Montreal. They joined the trauma center last week. And they're not the last. When asked during a national radio interview why she made the decision, Halima responded, without hesitation, Europe gave me tools, she said, but home gave me purpose. Real purpose. Zachary Burrow didn't return home with suitcases. He returned with firewalls, encryption scripts, and a blueprint drawn on the Krible's back of a napkin. For 8 years, he worked in the cybersecurity division of a private defense contractor in California, just 20 minutes from the Google campus. On paper, he was invisible. Top clearance, confidential projects, no social media. But to those who knew, he was one of the best code architects in the field. The kind of mind Western agencies monitored without admitting they were watching. And yet, when he watched President Trayor's speech, something in him shifted, not out of nostalgia, out of rage. He remembered the night 3 years earlier when his uncle in Burkina Faso died after a delayed emergency surgery. His medical records had been sent through a third-party server hosted in Belgium, flagged as a security risk and never arrived in time. Zachary filed a quiet inquiry. The answer, he got chilled him. System flagged your nation's data as high risk. It was blocked. Blocked. That was the word that stuck in his throat for months. So when Trey said, we don't need donations, we need you, Zachary didn't blink. He submitted his resignation. The next day, his employer counted with a 30% raise. He sent back 2 words, I'm done here. He landed in Ouagadougou and didn't wait for a press conference. He went straight to the Ministry of Digital Affairs and presented a plan that silenced the entire room, replaced the entire hospital record-keeping infrastructure with a locally hosted firewall decentralized system coded in country, stored in country, controlled in country. The minister asked, how long would that take realistically? Zachary looked at his watch. Give me a team. 2 weeks. That's all I'll need. They gave him a dusty office and 5 underpaid IT grads. He renamed the group The Core. They slept on beanbags, ate street food, coded through blackouts. And by day 5, they had already mapped every weak point in the current system. On day 7, they identified 3 active surveillance ports connected to data centers in France, Germany, and Ireland. Zachary ordered an immediate severing of those connections. A junior tech asked, won't that break the system entirely? Zachary smiled. Exactly. That's the whole point. They didn't patch over the holes. They started over from scratch, line by line. They rebuilt the entire patient record system, birth history, vaccine tracking, allergies, prescriptions, emergency contacts, all in one encrypted portal that could function without an internet connection. and sync once daily to a secured internal cloud. Day 12. They launched the pilot in 3 hospitals. Within 48 hours, it had already prevented 6 misdiagnoses, tracked 2 allergic reactions, and flagged 1 foreign device attempting to access the database. Zachary traced that IP back to a server in Virginia. He didn't say anything publicly. He just blocked the address and wrote in the log, "Try again if you dare." By day 14, the system was running nationwide. Medical staff across the country began receiving training. Zachary's team built tutorials in French, Moor, and Dula. No Western platform, no need for Google accounts, just local servers, solar-powered routers, and Burkina annuity. Foreign agencies took notice. 1 week after launch, a European Union cybersecurity firm reached out requesting a code audit for quality assurance. Zachary laughed and declined. "We're not your testing ground," he said. "We're your warning," clear and loud. His success wasn't just technical, it was symbolic. For the first time in Burkina Faso's modern history, a core national infrastructure was not reliant on foreign servers, not monitored, not leased, not borrowed, owned. Trey made an unannounced visit to the CEO's basement office. He didn't bring cameras. He just sat on a bench beside Zachary and asked one question: "How secure are we now?" Zachary answered, "We're not just secure anymore. We're invisible to the ones who thought they owned us." The president stood, shook his hand, and left without a word. The following day, the National Telecom Agency invited Zachary to a private meeting. They showed him evidence that foreign data requests on Burkina citizens had dropped by 96% in just 1 week. He nodded, already working on the next project, replacing imported voting software with an offline biometric system developed entirely in-house. He refused interviews, but sent one written statement to a Pan-African tech journal: "Cybersecurity is not about code. It's about sovereignty and dignity." The younger generation took note. In universities, IT students started wearing t-shirts that read, "The core built, not bought." Tech boot camps filled up. Local coding schools saw a 400% increase in enrollment. And in cafes across Ouagadougou, teenagers spoke not of foreign visas, but of startup ideas. When asked if he missed Silicon Valley, Zachary answered with a smirk, "They had satellites, but we had silence. And in that silence, we built something they never expected: our own shield." Cora didn't grow up with fabric. She grew up with silence. Her mother worked 2 jobs in northern Italy. Her grandmother, a seamstress back in Burkina Faso, used to send little swatches of woven cloth in envelopes, each piece softer than the last, each one carrying the scent of a place Cora barely remembered. She kept them in a shoebox beneath her bed in Milan. By Artisan, she had already made waves in the European fashion world. Her brand SA fused Afro-centric patterns with European tailoring proofs. Supermodels wore her jackets. Editors called her the Milan Miracle. But Cora never felt like she belonged. Not fully. She knew when people praised her, they praised the novelty, not the origin. That all changed the moment she saw the video. It was President Trayor's speech, the one that didn't just echo across borders, but deep into bones, when he said, "You are our seed, scattered across the world. Now is the season to return." She paused the screen, her breath caught. For years, Cora thought she had escaped poverty, but suddenly she realized she had only walked away from responsibility. She packed everything in a single weekend. She canceled 2 shows, terminated a European licensing deal, and boarded a flight to Bobo Dioulasso without announcing her departure. Her friends called it madness. The fashion world called it career suicide. She called it stitching home back together. Upon arrival, she contacted the Ministry of Youth and Women's Empowerment. She proposed a school, not a fashion institute, but a design movement, a space where young Burkinab girls could learn how to take the threads of their past and weave them into something new for the future. The ministry offered her an old storage building downtown. It was falling apart. Cora said yes without hesitation. Her first act, she painted the outside wall bright yellow and wrote in bold red letters, "Style is sovereignty." Inside, she placed her grandmother's old Singer sewing machine in the center of the room like an altar. Around it, she arranged bolts of fabric from 2 worlds, Italian silk on one table, traditional Faso Danfani and Kente on the other. On the first day of class, girls showed up. Ages ranged from 13 to 22. Some arrived barefoot, some with babies on their hips. All unsure, Cora welcomed them, not with instructions, but with a story. She held up a length of silk. This, she said, is Milan. Smooth, elegant, expensive. Just like the fashion capital it came from. Then she held up a strip of kente. And this is us. Bold, complex, generational, sacred. She placed the two fabrics side by side. One carries legacy, she said. The other carries trend. We wear both, and we honor both. From that day on, the studio buzzed. Within weeks, the girls were designing dresses, jackets, school uniforms, and ceremonial robes. They practiced cuts by day and draped by candlelight at night. Cora taught them to hand-stitch names into linings. We don't make clothes, she told them. We make declarations of identity and pride. She refused to charge tuition. Instead, she asked only for commitment. Give me 3 months, she said, and you'll never be invisible again. Not to anyone. The turning point came during a national youth showcase. Her students walked a makeshift runway inside a community center. Instead of supermodels, they used local farmers, market women, school teachers. The designs were electric, modern fits with ancient symbols embroidered into seams. One dress had the phrase, "I carry my village on my back," stitched across the shoulders in 3 languages. The audience was stunned. A journalist snapped a photo of a young girl named Zara Dew in a green bee and gold pants suit, holding her baby brother while walking the runway barefoot. That image made the cover of 5 African fashion magazines. The caption read, "The future wears both." Cora didn't care about magazines. She cared about the waiting list. Within a month, 400 girls applied for the next cohort. A European fashion house reached out offering to fund the school in exchange for co-branding rights. She declined. "We are not a charity case." She wrote back, "We're a return and a revolution." Soon, local demand grew. Schools began requesting uniforms. Wedding ceremonies and festivals all turned to her graduates. The local economy shifted. Tailoring stalls replaced import shops, thread by thread. Tradition became not just relevant, but profitable. One evening, after the students had gone home, Cora sat at her grandmother's sewing machine and wrote a letter. She folded it into fabric and pinned it to the wall. It read, "You sent me thread. I brought back a tapestry." When asked by a visiting official what her long-term goal was, Cora didn't mention profit or expansion. She simply said, "I want every girl in this country to know she can create beauty, not borrow it from somewhere else." And just like that, a stitch became a movement. The gates opened at 6:45 a.m. by the sound of sandals, suitcases, and whispered prayers. Some had walked 10 miles, others came by bus. A few flew in from neighboring countries the night before, too nervous to sleep, but when they stepped through the gates of Bina, Faso's new national medical training campus, they all paused, right there at the entrance. Printed in bold across the front courtyard wall was a banner that stretched the length of 2 city buses, training Africa's healthcare leaders. It wasn't a motto, it was a mission, built in record time under Trayer's mission, Renaissance Initiative. The campus had been designed by returning engineers and funded by both diaspora donations and redirected state resources. No Western banks, no foreign donors, no strings. Every brick laid by Burkinabe hands. This wasn't just a school, it was a declaration. The courtyard was alive with dozens of languages. Moor, Dula, French, Hausa, TAT, even English. Students had come from all over West Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, Mali, Côte d'Ivoire. Some wore white coats, others still had travel dust on their shoes. One girl from Benin carried her textbooks in a woven rice sack, another from Sierra Leone clutched her stethoscope like a relic. The faculty stood at attention. A retired cardiologist from Washington, D.C., now living in Ouagadougou. A pediatrician from Da who had trained half of Sahel's rural doctors. A trauma nurse from South Africa. And at the center of it all, Dr. Haleli Masuri, who had come from Paris to Bobo Dulasso to open a neurotrauma center, now doubling as lead director for surgical training. She walked to the center of the courtyard and raised her voice. "Welcome," she said. "You are not just students anymore. You are foundations, strong and vital." Silence fell. This campus is not here to teach you how to leave, she continued. It is here to teach you how to heal what was left behind. Inside the main lecture hall, the walls were covered in maps, not of colonial territories, but of underserved regions marked with real-time health gaps, provinces with no OBGYN, districts without emergency trauma care, towns relying on traveling herbalists due to doctor shortages. Every chair had a nameplate, not for the students sitting there, but for the village they had pledged to return to after graduation. One read Fod and Gorma, Arshar, 000 people. No surgeon. Another Banora, 4 births per day. No, NICU. Students didn't just learn medicine, they learned mission. The first class of the day, community-based diagnostics. The professor, a former Mayo Clinic specialist from Minnesota, who had returned to his native Kusa Kadugu, began by asking one question: how do you treat pneumonia in a village with no oxygen tank, no internet, and only one flashlight? No one gave a textbook answer. That was the point. The curriculum had been redesigned from scratch, not copied, not translated, built. Every module included rural simulations, indigenous knowledge, integration, policy literacy. Students weren't just expected to become doctors. They were expected to become system architects, advocates, bridge builders. In the skills lab, one instructor held up a scalpel and said, "This blade can cut skin or cut colonial thinking. Learn when and how to use it." Well, word of the new campus spread quickly. Alizé, Rana Segment. Reuters published a piece titled Burkina Faso Reinvents African Medical Education. Harvard reached out about a potential research collaboration. Trayer's office responded, "Thank you, but we'll invite you when we're ready on our terms." By week 2, applications from across the continent had tripled. One letter arrived from a 17-year-old in Liberia. "I have no father, no passport, and no electricity, but if I can learn with you, I will walk to Burkina Faso, even barefoot." Meanwhile, inside the faculty lounge, discussions were already underway to add new departments: infectious disease, emergency response, mental health, and maternal care. One professor from Nigeria suggested the next step should be mobile clinics operated by graduates serving border regions, long ignored by international aid. Dr. Halema agreed. Let them laugh at our labs. Let them scoff at our equipment. But let them try to explain why our patients now survive what theirs do not. That night, the student dorms echoed with energy. No parties, just preparation. Groups huddled over anatomy books. Study circles formed in 3 languages at once. A boy from Wigwa helped a girl from Accra translate case notes. Laptops were shared. Zolware stories. In one room, a girl whispered to her bunkmate, "Do you think we'll make it through this?" Her friend replied, "We already did." We're here together because this wasn't just a first day of school. It was the first day of a future where Africa no longer asked for permission to heal itself. They didn't say it out loud, not at first, but the unease had begun. In quiet offices across Brussels, Washington, and Geneva, policymakers stared at numbers that didn't make sense. 000 highly trained African professionals had returned to Burkina Faso in less than 2 months, not as refugees, not as aid workers, but as sovereign citizens reclaiming their place. And more were coming. At a United States health policy round in Washington, D.C., an analyst projected a report across the screen. At the top, in bold red font, "Reverse brain drain threatens domestic healthcare resilience." Below it, charts showed a rising number of African-born physicians submitting notices to leave hospitals in Chicago, Philadelphia, Houston, and Los Angeles. Most of them were from Burkina Faso, Ghana, Nigeria, or Mali. One official muttered, "We trained them. We invested. Now they're walking out." Another answered, "No, they're walking home." Finally, by the end of the week, a cable was sent from the United States Embassy in Ouagadougou, marked urgent. The request: a high-level diplomatic meeting with President Ibrahim Trayor to discuss long-term bilateral cooperation on talent development. In private, they meant one thing: stop encouraging people to leave. When the message reached Trayor, he didn't respond immediately. He waited. Instead of calling back, he walked through the halls of the new medical campus. Students were prepping for a volunteer rotation in the north. He passed a group of them loading boxes of supplies onto a solar-powered truck. A girl looked up and saluted. "We're ready, Captain, always." He smiled, nodded at her in the moment. The next morning, his reply went public. It was short, only one sentence. "You had them for 30 years. Let us have them for a generation." And with that, silence fell. On embassies across the Atlantic, the blowback started. A prominent European newspaper ran an editorial titled, "Is Africa draining us now?" Another publication asked if reverse migration would leave Western infrastructure vulnerable. Television host discussed the economic risks of emotional politics. But no one mentioned why these professionals had left in the first place. They didn't mention the decades of microaggressions in hospitals. They didn't mention the invisible ceilings in tech firms. They didn't mention the countless Africans passed over for promotions despite credentials and dedication. In Burkina Faso, no one cared what they said. They were too busy building the new trauma center in Bobo. Dasso had just hired 6 more return doctors. The tech campus announced its first set of graduates. A new biochemistry lab opened in Kadagu, and the National Health Registry, coded entirely by Zachary Barrow's team, now had more accurate real-time data than most West African nations combined. Western agencies began digging deeper. Who was behind this infrastructure shift? How was it moving this fast? And why hadn't anyone noticed earlier? They traced donations, but the money wasn't coming from foreign investors. It came from diaspora communities, Uber drivers in Paris, nurses in Toronto, accountants in Atlanta, all sending small amounts through pulled WhatsApp groups. No loans, no conditions, just commitment. In a closed-door meeting at a European development bank, an advisor raised the most uncomfortable question yet. What happens if other African countries follow? That's when the quiet panic turned into real fear. A leaked document from a policy institute revealed that some officials had begun drafting counter strategies, retain African professionals through new incentive packages, rebrand aid as partnership, counter disinformation with success stories of Africans abroad. But it was too late. In Nairobi, a Burkina Faso IT expert named Ali Jinaba returned home with a blockchain voting system. In Dar, 2 engineers flew back to begin work on a geothermal project in the project Southeast. In Baltimore, a well-known orthopedic surgeon handed in his resignation. "I'm going where my hands matter more than my skin ever did." What do you think of Trayor's bold response to global pressure? Share your thoughts below. Comment, "Africa Rise," if you believe in the continent's comeback. Meanwhile, Trayor doubled down. He gave another speech, this time at the National Assembly. "We are not stealing anyone's workforce. We are reclaiming our life force. You do not get to profit from our pain forever. For 30 years, you told our best to leave. Now we are telling them to come home, and they are listening." The chamber erupted in the regret. Applause. Outside, young people gathered around radios and phones to replay the clip. A trending tweet read, "He didn't beg. He told the truth." In Washington, the embassy sent a follow-up cable. This time, it was not a meeting request. It was a warning. Be aware. Burkina Faso's model is spreading, and that was the point. Trayor didn't want praise. He didn't want sanctions. He didn't even want sympathy. He wanted the return. And now that it had begun, no policy paper, no press, no polite threat could stop it. His name was Dr. Noel Damber, 36 years old, born in Wahigwa, raised in the United States. After his father won a teaching fellowship in Texas, he'd graduated from MIT with a doctorate in biomedical engineering and had spent the last 10 years developing early diagnostic technology for major hospitals. He'd been offered a green card, tenure at Stanford, and equity in a fast-rising medical startup, but he left it all behind. When he heard Trayor's words, "You are our seeds," scattered across the world. Now is the season to return. He didn't ask for a press welcome. He didn't bring investors or headlines. He arrived with 2 suitcases, one full of parts, the other full of hope. Within days of landing in Ouagadougou, Dr. Noel Damber submitted a proposal to the Ministry of Health. His goal wasn't to build new hospitals. It was to give rural clinics the power to diagnose conditions quickly before they became fatal. He designed a device the size of a backpack, inside solar-charged batteries, a thermal scanner, a blood analysis chip, and a speech-guided AI programmed in 4 local languages. No internet required. No expensive maintenance. just one trained operator and a heartbeat. The ministry was skeptical, but Trayor wasn't tested. He said, "Let the land decide what works." Noel and a small team took the prototype to a village called Zangogo, 7 hours by truck from the capital. No electricity, no paved roads. One midwife, no doctor, no lab. When they arrived, it was almost dark. A woman ran toward them holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her baby had stopped crying hours earlier. Breathing was shallow. The midwife, trembling, explained that she suspected a bacterial infection, but couldn't be sure. They had no lab, no transport, no options. No, opened the pack. He placed the baby on a flat surface, turned on the thermal scanner, attached a blood sensor to the newborn's heel. The device spoke in soft, more processing. Please wait. 60 seconds passed. Then it spoke again. Infection detected. Neonatal sepsis likely. Recommend immediate antibiotic administration. The midwife burst into tears. She pulled a vial of ampicillin from her kit, administered the injection. Within an hour, the baby was moving. Within 6, he was nursing. The next morning, the mother approached Noel, her eyes swollen from crying. She whispered, "I named him Renaissance because you brought life back where we had only waiting." Word traveled fast. By the end of the week, Noel's device had been tested in DOL, 5 more villages. In each, it caught things local staff couldn't see in time. Early-stage malaria, pneumonia, anemia, and pregnancy. It gave answers in minutes, not days. In a country where rural death was often explained as fate, now there was knowledge. And with knowledge came control. The Ministry of Health authorized immediate replication. Within 3 weeks, Noel's lab in Ouagadougou was producing 30 devices a day. Returning software engineers joined the team, programming the AI to recognize more symptoms, more dialects, more emergency cues. Hospitals in urban areas were stunned. A tool built for forgotten villages was outperforming imported equipment in reliability. Trayor visited the lab without warning. He walked from bench to bench, watching engineers calibrate sensors and weld circuit boards. He asked Noel, "What made you design something this simple?" Noel answered, "Because I remember what it felt like to wait for help that never came." Not once. Tor nodded slowly. And now they don't have to wait anymore? International media tried to frame it as a fluke. A tech blog in London called it a curious innovation from an unlikely country. A health publication questioned the accuracy of rural diagnosis without Western oversight, but their doubt only pushed Noel further. He and his team began training local youth, high school, graduates, not engineers, to operate the devices. He wrote the manual at a 6th grade reading level. "This is not for experts," he said. "This is for villages the world never looked at even twice, if ever." Within 2 months, the first class of rural health tech operators graduated. They returned to their towns not just as aides, but as lifelines. A small village in the east held a naming ceremony for their first healthy newborn in 6 years. They sent Dr. Noel Damber a video, a baby wrapped in woven cloth cradled beneath a tree sleeping. The caption read, "Because you made a machine that truly mattered." When asked by a foreign journalist what he missed most about the US, and Noel said they had machines that filled rooms. "I built one that fit in a bag, but here it saved a life. That's what matters most." The device now has a name, Sir, meaning path in doula, and it's just the beginning. The hum of conversation in the cafeteria wasn't in one language. It was in 10. On any given afternoon, you could hear Twi, Euroraba, Fulfa, Wolof, Moor, English, French, and 3 kinds of broken slang all swirling together over trays of rice, beans. But the sound wasn't chaotic. It was electric. At Burkina Faso's National Tech Campus, the newest arrivals weren't just Burkinab. They came from Ghana, Nigeria, Mali, Benin, Togo, Liberia, and even as far as Sudan. Some had university degrees. Some had only certificates. All came with the same purpose: to learn from those who had returned, not returnees in name, but returnees in power. Engineers, developers, coders, robotic specialists, who had left places like Silicon Valley and Zurich to build systems from the ground up with nothing but belief, soldering kits, and freedom. The cafeteria had become the heartbeat of it all. There were no assigned tables, no hierarchy. Just people sitting where they felt the spark. A girl from Ara discussing a water purification algorithm with a data scientist from Lagos. A Burkinab technician explaining solar storage to a Malian farm systems designer. They didn't care about degrees. They cared about building something their countries could own. One student said it best, holding a laptop covered in hand-drawn circuit diagrams. This isn't a Burkinab movement. It's African. The phrase caught fire. It showed up on t-shirts, laptop stickers, campus walls. Someone even painted it above the lab entrance in bold red. Not just Burkinab African. Outside news agencies tried to keep up. CNN called it the West African Tech Renaissance. Alza referred to it as Pan-African. Innovation, dva, leng, from. But it was a French journalist who accidentally named it best. During a live segment with a hint of disbelief, she called it the second, independence. That clip went viral. At the next campus town hall, students broke into spontaneous applause. When the clip played, a girl from Lagos stood up, looked around, and shouted, "Did they think we'd wait forever to be free again?" The crowd roared back. No, what made the place different wasn't the buildings. They were basic. It wasn't the funding. There was none from outside. It was the curriculum built entirely by retinees. It focused on solving real-world problems, broken supply chains, unreliable power grids, corrupted digital systems, agricultural gaps. Every class required a final project not just to be presented but to be implemented in the field. One team of students designed a battery cooling system that allowed solar panels in desert villages to last 5 times longer. Another developed a digital land registry app that worked offline, preventing land theft and legal fraud in rural areas. A group from Mali built a solar-powered refrigeration system for transporting vaccines. Tested, deployed, and running within 3 weeks. Every success was tracked on a giant chalkboard wall labeled what we did, ourselves. Every failure was logged right next to it under what we'll fix. Next, there were no grades, only growth. Returning mentors didn't play professors, they played teammates. Zachary Barrow, the cyber architect who built the National Digital Firewall, held daily question and answer sessions where students could debate him openly. One afternoon, a 17-year-old from Côte d'Ivoire challenged his encryption logic. The next day, Zachary offered her a spot on his core development team. "If you're brave enough to question me," he said, with a smile, "then you're already ready to lead. Believe me, word of this motto spread faster than any government could control. Education ministers from 5 West African countries visited within the month. A delegation from Rwanda asked for curriculum templates. A Pan-African Tech Alliance was proposed, not based in Europe, not funded by the World Bank, but grounded entirely in African capital, African code, African confidence. Burkina Faso had become the new nerve center of something no one could predict, but everyone could feel. Foreign embassies began quietly requesting campus tours. Triers. Administration declined. "This isn't a museum," one official replied. "It's a forge. We don't need observers here. We need builders who will stay," and they kept building. In the cafeteria one evening, a quiet moment captured the new mood. A Ghanaian boy who'd arrived just 3 weeks earlier looked around the room and said, "You know what's different here? We're not competing like before. We're connecting instead." A girl from Nigeria nodded. "And we're not begging to be seen anymore. We're building what they simply can't ignore." Now, someone raised a glass of BAP and whispered, "To the second independence." No one clapped. They didn't need to. They went back to work. They came back with boxes of books, toys, laptops, tiny shoes, and big dreams. The returnees had done what most said they never would. Left 6F figurer, lives behind, to start again on dusty roads. But what they didn't expect was how unprepared their children would be. At the airport, children held their parents' hands, confused. At school, they stood silent during roll call, unable to pronounce their classmates' names. On the playgrounds of Ouagadougou, many stood on the edges, speaking only French or only English, while the local children switched easily between Moor, Dula, and Fulfur. It wasn't hostility. It was absence. The returnees had come home, but their children hadn't yet found it. One evening at a community event in Kodu, a little girl from Montreal stood in a crowd of singing children. When the elder led a call and response in Dula, she didn't answer. She looked up at her father, confused. "What are they saying?" she asked softly. He didn't know how to explain. He knelt beside her and said quietly, "That's who we were before we left." My love. Within a month, the pattern was clear. Kids were struggling. They didn't understand folk stories. They didn't get the jokes. They couldn't join the songs. The cultural disconnect became a soft wound, quiet but deep. Many parents began to feel a quiet panic. They had brought their children back to roots they couldn't recognize. That's when the elders stepped in. Without being asked, village grandmothers, go retired. Teachers and musicians began organizing what they called cultural reconnection. Camps, no grades, no uniforms, just fire pits, drums, mats, food, and patience. They began in courtyards and community centers. The first camp welcomed 17 children from the United States, Canada, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. They were taught how to greet elders and more, how to introduce themselves in Dula, and how to clap to the rhythm of ancient chants. In one session, an elder told a story about a lion who forgot his name and had to journey through fire to remember it. The children sat wide-eyed. At the end, the Go asked, "Do you know what that lion's name was?" A boy from London whispered, "Borsina." The Go smiled. "Exactly right. That's exactly who he was." In another camp, a girl from Atlanta was taught how to carry water on her head, walk barefoot, and sing lullabies. Her great-grandmother once knew by heart. When she returned home, she asked her mother, "Did we ever live in a village before?" Her mother nodded, eyes glassy. "We did. You just didn't get to grow up there like I did." Language became the bridge. One camp used wooden blocks to teach alphabets and more. Another turned proverbs into games. A phrase like, "A tree without roots falls in the wind," was matched with lessons on family history. And then there was music. Every Friday night, drums filled the air. The children were taught call and response songs. At first, many just listened, but by the second month, they sang loud, off-key, and proud. A teacher from Makra visiting Borsina for the tech campus said it best after watching a performance. "They're not learning culture. They're remembering it again." Parents watched in awe as their children transformed. One boy who barely spoke to his grandfather now sat with him every evening, learning how to whistle in full fulo. A girl who used to wear headphones during mealtimes now led the family in a harvest prayer she learned at camp. The breakthrough moment came during a ceremony at a village camp outside Bobo Dulaso. A young boy named Ismail Dumbia, born in Brooklyn, was asked by his grandfather, "Do you know what Borsina means?" Ismail thought for a moment, then asked, "Is it just a name?" The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, but not just a name. It means land of upright people, not rich people, not powerful people, upright people, those who stand tall because they have nothing to hide." Ismail stared at the ground, silent. Then he looked up and asked, "Are we those people now?" The Ealer's voice cracked. "That's why you came back. So you can be." The moment was filmed and shared online. Millions watched a child rediscover the meaning in a word used every day but never explained. Borsina. Since then, the camps have spread to every province. New modules have been added. Ancestral farming, weaving, storytelling, traditional ethics. Elders now walk with tablets, teaching children how to blend the old with the new. One elder said, "We are not afraid of the internet, but we must not let it erase our memory and identity." The government has taken notice. Plans are in motion to integrate cultural reconnection into public education, not as an elective, but as a foundation, because what good is returning to your country if your children don't recognize it? And what power lies in rebuilding a nation if you forget the rhythm of its songs? It started with a leaked memo, 5 pages marked confidential, from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. One line was highlighted in yellow. Burkina Faso's return movement presents a credible model for anti-dependency governance. Beneath it, a warning risk of diaspora national awakening across Francophone Africa. The memo circulated quietly through diplomatic channels, but not fast enough. What had begun as a hopeful return movement had evolved into something far more powerful and far more dangerous to old systems. Burkina Faso wasn't just calling its people home. It was proving they never needed to leave in the first place. In response, France tightened the screws. Aid packages were reviewed. Terms were changed. Development grants once offered with a handshake now came with clauses. Standard oversight, external consultancy review, regional cooperation expectations. In plain terms, surveillance, control, compliance. But the Burkinab government didn't blink. They declined 2 of the offers immediately. The funds had been meant for rural healthcare expansion, but new clinics had already opened, built by returned doctors, equipped with devices from local labs, powered by solar grids, designed by homegrown engineers. No need to wait, no need to ask, no need to beg. The International Monetary Fund followed, silently. Loan offers slated for infrastructure were paused. There were no official statements, just delays, then deadlines, then silence. Yet, Burkina Faso's roads kept expanding. Solar farms in the east came online. Village schools opened with desks, carved from reclaimed wood and lessons printed on locally made paper. Every time someone asked, how are they doing this? Without loans. The answer was the same with the people who left and came back. Inside intelligence rooms in Brussels and Washington, reports piled up. The files no longer just tracked military, alliances, or election cycles. Now they tracked ideas. One analyst wrote, Burkina Faso is successfully modeling non-aligned development strategies. Another warned, the success of their Diaspora program is undermining the narrative that African states require long-term aid dependency. They weren't just worried about Burkina Faso. They were worried about what Burkina Faso represented, because if one country could reclaim its doctors, engineers, coders, and teachers, and function without begging, what stopped others? By the 3rd month of the Mission Renaissance Initiative, applications to return had spiked in 5 other action countries. WhatsApp forums with names like Rebuild Lagos, Return to Dar, Ghana. Routes now began forming across diaspora communities. Some already had flight plans. Others were organizing shipping containers full of tools, seeds, books. The African awakening wasn't coming. It had started quietly, boldly, without permission. At a regional conference in Abidjan, a French development officer asked President Trayor if Burkina Faso would reconsider IMF loan partnerships in the near future. Traoré responded, without pause, we don't negotiate our independence anymore. We practice it daily. A few seats away, a Ghanaian delegate whispered to his colleague, he just said what we all think but won't admit out loud. Back home, the changes were undeniable. Clinics in Sabar and Kaya reported the first month in years with 0 infant deaths. A return farming cooperative in the Northwest had produced enough millet to export, not to France, but to solar grids. Now lit up 36 rural schools that had once depended on diesel donations. The foreign press tried to reframe the story. A French headline, read, Burkina Faso is a risky path forward. A British columnist called the movement a romantic but impractical nationalist experiment, but the data said otherwise. School enrollment was up. Rural to urban migration was down. Urban food dependency had dropped by 15%. Even black market trade routes saw a black decline. No one needed contraband when the real goods were finally at home. Still, not everyone celebrated. Former NGO workers reported slashed budgets. Foreign consultants found themselves uninvited to policy tables they once dominated. Private contractors lost bids to cooperatives run by Return Burkina Bay. One European consultant vented on LinkedIn, they're replacing trained professionals with volunteers who don't follow international best practices. The post was flooded with replies, most of them from African professionals, who were the volunteers. And in one reply that went viral, a returning nurse wrote, we're not volunteers, we're owners now, and that's what scares you. At the highest levels, the West began recalibrating. Policy memos turned into strategy sessions. Think tanks recommended cultural diplomacy campaigns to maintain soft influence. A few called for economic pressure. Most advised caution because no one wanted to be the first to publicly attack a country that was rebuilding itself without debt, without military force, and without corruption. The threat wasn't violence. It wasn't revolution. It was this example. And no one had a plan to stop it. The next project was led by Cardi Tiamogo, born in Faru, Gourma Region, but raised in Canada from age 6. Her earliest memory of Burkina Faso was the sound of her mother praying during a blackout and the scent of charcoal in Foklet. The kitchen. After moving to Toronto, life took a different rhythm. Hospitals with flashing monitors, nurses with clipped words, and halls that smelled like bleach. Not boiling millet. She became a nurse, almost by accident. She signed up to help. She stayed because it was the only place where people cried with gratitude. For 15 years, Katie worked in Ontario's maternal health system. She delivered babies in private rooms, managed C-sections, trained interns, and watched bureaucracy grind down families who looked like her. Then, one day, a clip of President Trayor's speech landed in a WhatsApp group she barely checked. She opened it while on break when he said, "We don't need donations. We need you." She dropped her tea. By the end of the week, her resignation was filed. Her colleagues were stunned. "You're leaving to work where there are no incubators," one asked. "Where's the logic in that?" She didn't answer. She just whispered, "Where's the heart?" When she landed in Fugogen, Gorma, her childhood town, had changed. The roads were dustier, the buildings smaller than she remembered, but the eyes of the women in the market were the same. Worn, proud, exhausted. Within days, she asked to visit the region's only maternity facility. There wasn't one. There had been a clinic 5 years ago, but it shut down after international partners withdrew funding. It was once a school before that. Now it was just a crumbling structure with broken windows and rusted gates. But when Callie Tiamo walked through it, she didn't see failure. She saw blueprints. With her own personal savings and a small grant from a Diaspora health co-op, she began reconstruction. Walls were patched, ceilings reinforced, solar panels installed. Beds donated by returning doctors in Ouagadougou arrived in trucks. And in less than 8 weeks, the first community-run maternal clinic in the province reopened. There was no ribbon cutting, no press, just a wooden sign that read, "Here we deliver the future." The first delivery came 2 nights later. A woman named Miriam Kondo had been in labor for 15 hours with no transport to the capital. Her husband carried her on the back of a motorbike. They arrived at midnight. Katie had just finished mopping the floor. She washed her hands and took the woman in herself. The baby was breech. The mother was dehydrated, but with nothing more than determination, makeshift tools, and 2 student midwives trained by Cardi just the week before. The child was born alive, healthy, crying so loud it woke the neighbors. The next morning, Mariam named the baby Cardi. By the 3rd month, the clinic had handled 72 births, non fatal. By the 5th month, they'd opened a prenatal nutrition station, a postpartum counseling program, and a traveling vaccination team for villages. Without access, the local mortality rate dropped so fast, regional health officials thought the data was wrong. They checked. It wasn't. Word spread like wildfire. Women who used to give birth in huts now walked miles to reach the school that turned into a promise. Men began volunteering to dig wells nearby. Young girls who once dropped out of school due to pregnancy came back not as patients but as interns. And then came the moment no one expected. The health minister arrived unannounced. He walked through the corridor in disbelief, looked at charts, touched the incubator that had been shipped in from a private donor in Ghana, saw babies wrapped in clean cloth, mothers smiling, student midwives taking notes in both French and doula. At the end of the tour, he turned to Cardi and asked, "How did you do all this without a single foreign agency involved?" She looked at him and said softly, "Because I'm not foreign. I'm from here. I just came back." The minister didn't speak. He sat on the bench outside, put his hands to his face, and cried. Later, during a patient press briefing, he said, "She didn't just return. She rewrote our future. The clinic is now a model. 4 more are being developed in surrounding provinces using Card's design. She's currently writing a manual in 3 languages for other return nurses to replicate this process. No headquarters, no bureaucracy, just training, trust, and the will to act." When asked in an interview what she would tell nurses still working abroad, she smiled and said, "They trained us to serve systems, but we were born to serve people. I want to remember why you became a nurse. Come home." The building wasn't much to look at. A single-story structure with faded yellow paint, tin roofing, and a courtyard still lined with uneven bricks. But inside, something was happening that had never happened before. In Burkina Faso, it wasn't just a clinic. It was a reimagining. The children of returnees had become the quiet challenge no one saw coming. Brilliant, eager, curious, but disconnected. They spoke fluent English or French, but they struggled with local dialects. They excelled in math and science, but they couldn't answer questions about their ancestral regions. They knew Greek mythology, American presidents, the Eiffel Tower, yet they had never heard of the Mossy Kingdom, the Battle of Ouagadougou, or Queen Zerunia. Many sat in classrooms confused. When their peers laughed at proverbs they didn't understand, some refused to eat lunch because the flavors were too private, strong, too unfamiliar. One child whispered to a teacher, "I feel like I'm still just visiting always." So, a group of educators, some returnees, some local, decided to create something radical. A school not designed to catch them up, but to bring them home. They called it École Racine, the root school. Classes were small, desks made from locally sourced wood, walls painted with scenes from African history. One classroom displayed Sanka, the garner, the symbol of returning to retrieve what was lost. Another displayed a timeline that began not with the Greeks, but with Timbuktu. The first lesson every student received was this: your value is not foreign. It is right here in your soil, your people, your name. Every subject was woven with identity. History began with pre-colonial Africa, not the age of exploration. Science included traditional agricultural techniques alongside physics. Literature studied not only Victor Hugo and Shakespeare, but also Chinua Achebe, Moramama Bar, and Oral Go traditions. One teacher explained, "We don't teach our children to leave. We teach them to serve and to stay." The curriculum was bilingual and rooted. Students learned French and English fluently, but they also learned more doula or full folder depending on their heritage. No child was allowed to graduate without learning how to introduce themselves in their grandparents' language. A returning father from London stood at the back of the first school assembly, tears welling in his eyes. His daughter, who once refused to speak anything but English, stood and recited a village song she'd learned just 1 week earlier. The lyrics weren't complex. They said, "I am from the river." I remember the sound of home in that moment. The school offered more than knowledge, it offered grounding. There was a garden where students learned to grow indigenous crops, a textile lab where girls and boys were taught to sew traditional patterns. Elders were invited weekly to tell stories, share recipes, explain symbols. But the real turning point came from a child named Amina Fomber, 10 years old, born in Paris, daughter of 2 returnees, a surgeon and an architect. For months, she had been withdrawn, refused to participate, said she missed her real school. But one afternoon, she handed in an essay titled, "Why I'll Never Leave Home." She wrote, "In Paris, I was smart, but I was alone. Here I am learning who I am. My grandfather says our name means something. I didn't believe him, but now I do. I don't want to leave again. I want to build a house next to his. I want to grow trees and make books. I don't want to be lost anymore." The essay spread like wildfire across the country. It was read aloud in Parliament. Teachers from every region requested photocopies for their classrooms. One government official declared, "This is not just an essay, it's a declaration, a manifesto for belonging." The Ministry of Education has now begun drafting a national program to expand schools like École Racine across provinces. It's called the Return Curriculum because while it was easy to call doctors and engineers home with speeches, helping children belong required something deeper. The world had trained them to dream in someone else's language. This school was teaching them to dream in their own language, their soils. Language. One student walked past a visitor one afternoon and said softly, I think home was where Wi-Fi worked. Now I think it's where my name has meaning." Requests began quietly at first. Emails, marked urgent, calls from diplomatic envoys, invitations to private dinners. Then came the formal memos, first from the U.S. Embassy, then from France. Each memo used different wording, but all shared the same intent. They wanted President Traore to address what they called the unintended consequences of the return movement. In plain terms, they were asking him to stop. Western hospitals were losing doctors. Tech firms were losing engineers. Universities were losing professors. They were losing control over a generation of Africans who no longer saw exile as success. What began as inspiration had become disruption. The embassies insisted it wasn't political. They said they supported mutually beneficial migration, but every document hinted at pressure, economic impact, assessments, workforce shortage forecasts. One French official went as far as to call the return movement a destabilizing trend. Another asked if Burkina Faso was poaching its own people. Traore received every letter. He read them carefully, then filed them away. He declined each meeting request, no apologies, no explanations. Instead, he broke ground on a new national structure in Ouagadougou, a massive circular building covered in red, green, and gold glass. The architecture was symbolic. No corners, no sharp turns, no elite wings, just a dome, equal, centered, open. He called it the Diaspora Dome, a national headquarters for global Burkinab. It wasn't just an office, it was a declaration. Inside, returnees would find shared workspaces, family legal support, investment, matchmaking services, housing guides, cultural integration teams, language, support, fast-track business licenses. No middlemen, no foreign consultants, just Burkina Bay. Helping Burkina Bay, the dome was built in just 90 days, funded by pooled contributions from returnees in Canada, the UK, Australia, and beyond. One section was named after a midwife, another after a software developer. Every wall was etched, honoring names of those who returned and stayed. At the opening ceremony, there were no dignitaries from abroad, only farmers, students, engineers, nurses, and children, waving small paper flags. A return architect, who helped design the structure, said simply, "We used to land at the airport with no direction. Now we have a front door." News of the dome spread instantly. African media outlets praised it widely. A laser called it the most visible infrastructure ever built solely for a nation's diaspora. A Kenyan journalists asked, "Is this the blueprint for the rest of the continent now?" But foreign diplomats were not impressed. Behind closed doors, embassy staff complained of a lack of cooperation. Some warned of reviewing aid agreements. Others proposed tightening visa access for Burkina Bay students. Trayor remained unmoved. In a national address aired live, he responded, not with retaliation, but with clarity. "When our people left, no one asked us for permission. Now that they return, we do not ask for approval either." The statement made headlines worldwide. In Washington, policy advisors scrambled to prepare a response. One senior official was overheard saying, "He's not fighting us, he's ignoring us, and that's worse." Meanwhile, the Diaspora Dome filled fast. Within weeks, over 3,000 returnees had registered. The building hosted workshops on sustainable farming, fintech incubation, trauma-informed, public health, and cultural storytelling. One night, a group of children born abroad were taught their first village dance in the courtyard. A journalist took a photo. The caption read, "The children they lost are finding their rhythm again." In Paris, the backlash sharpened. A panel of economists accused Trayor of nationalist disruption. One professor claimed Burkina Faso was creating a feedback loop of brain drain, reversal that could destabilize regional migration flows. But African commentators laughed. One Ghanaian anchor said, "Since when is healing your nation a crime?" Back in Ouagadougou, the energy inside the dome kept growing. A 72-year-old retired historian returned from Belgium and began writing curriculum on West African liberation movements. A robotics engineer from Tokyo offered to teach village children AI basics in their native language. A single mother from New Jersey opened a food stall on the ground floor, serving fusion dishes she called memory meals. Each return sparked another. A mother brought back 3 children. A surgeon brought 4 interns. A farmer brought seeds not seen in Bosina since the 1982nd. And with each return, the embassies grew quieter. Because how do you stop a people from coming home? It rose in silence, block by block, glass by glass, server by server. No groundbreaking ceremony, no ribbon cutting, just steady work, funded entirely by Burkinab hands. Returnees, local cooperatives, Diaspora tech guilds from 3 continents. The first fully African funded tech and innovation park in Ouagadougou didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with intent. From the outside, it looked like any modern research campus: solar panel roofing, sleek architecture, fiber optic, infrastructure, and dozens of satellite dishes pointed at the sky. But something was missing. There were no EU plaque, no USAID banners, no UN logo stamped into the concrete. Instead, stretched proudly across the front entrance in giant letters painted by a 16-year-old artist from Bobo Dioulasso, one message stared back at the world: built by belief. It wasn't just a slogan. It was a challenge. Inside the layout was unlike anything seen in traditional tech hubs. Coding labs sat next to farming analytics teams. One floor was dedicated solely to healthcare AI. Another hosted offline learning platforms. The cafeteria served traditional millet bowls alongside vegan wraps. Music in the peak, common spaces switched. From local folk songs to hip-hop beats to instrumental Go soundtracks played on tablets. Wi-Fi was free, but access to shallow distractions was blocked. Every site used had to serve learning, building, or restoring. There were no CEOs, just project leads. No dress code, just purpose. Students, returning engineers, and local coders worked side by side, solving problems too small for Western attention, but too big for communities to ignore. In one lab, a team of Bikini Bay developers created an app that alerted farmers in remote areas when rainfall was expected based on local humidity sensors. No internet needed. In another, young coders worked on a diagnostic program for rural clinics using voice-activated commands and more, and doula integrated with the Sierra device invented by Dr. Noel Damber. A teenage team launched a safety app for women traveling alone at night linked to a local emergency response network operated by community volunteers trained in trauma response. A programmer from Lagos arrived to help build an open-source electoral monitoring system, one that would be impossible to tamper with, even in areas without internet access. He said, "This isn't just about Burkina Faso. If this works, we all win." No patents were filed. Every line of code was logged in a public repository. The only license required respect for the people who needed it most. The energy inside the innovation park was undeniable. People called it the Forge. It wasn't the heat that shaped what was happening by the seaside. It was something deeper, something unshakable, being molded in silence. When a reporter asked why no Western funding had been accepted, Geneva Coma, the lead architect once codenamed Isa in earlier drafts, answered calmly, "Because every flag comes with a fingerprint. We didn't want anyone else's hands here." The international media didn't quite know how to process that. A BBC tech columnist tipped, half admiring, half skeptical. "It's impressive, but who's advising them?" The answer was stark in its simplicity. No one. They were advising themselves. When an American venture firm dangled a $5 million investment in exchange for naming rights, the board declined, respectfully, but firmly. When a French Innovation Council asked for a permanent observer seat, the team's reply was even sharper. "This space is for contributors, not spectators." Soon after, President Trayor walked the halls of the park, following the first successful prototype deployment. He didn't give a speech. He simply moved quietly from room to room, shook hands with students, and paused longest at the reinforced glass doors of the main server room. Above it, coders had bolted a phrase in heavy black letters: "We write our own code, because we write our own future." That evening, Trayor did something rare. He addressed the nation on television. His voice was steady, almost solemn. "We once begged for tools, now we build them. We once borrowed ideas, now we innovate. Let them ask how. Let them wonder where the strength comes from. Tell them it was always here, buried beneath our obedience. And now we are awake." There was no applause, only a stillness that felt heavier than cheers. Later that night, a photo spread across social media, 4 young girls seated cross-legged on a tiled floor, laptops glowing against their faces, cables tangled across their legs like roots. They were coding a disaster response algorithm, patching together open-source weather data with local alerts from farmers and villagers. The caption read simply, "No backup, no blueprint, just belief." By month's end, delegations from Kenya, Ghana, and Rwanda had booked visits. Requests for the open-source curriculum flooded inboxes. And every week, more members of the diaspora returned. One of them flew in from Switzerland. He looked around the new campus and said, half in awe, half in disbelief, "This doesn't look like Burkina Faso anymore." A young programmer near him smiled, without a trace of apology. "That's because you haven't updated your map yet." A week later, an envelope arrived at the presidential office in Ouagadougou. No escort, no wax seal, no ceremony, just paper, folded and hand-delivered by a visiting delegation. Inside was no letterhead, no official insignia, no printed signature, only a single message, handwritten in bold, deliberate strokes. "When your people return, tell them they are not alone." It was signed simply, Zakari. That note made its way quietly into a closed-door summit on regional cooperation. The president of Ghana held it in his hands. No reporters were present, no aides briefed, but everyone in the room felt it, not the weight of paper but the weight of the moment. For weeks, Accra had been watching the rise of Burkina Faso's return movement with cautious curiosity. Now it felt personal. Ghana was full of stories of professionals abroad, sending money home, building houses they never lived in, flying back only for funerals. Policymakers began to whisper, what if they came back? What if the cycle could be reversed? Trayor's note wasn't a provocation, it was an invitation. 2 days later, Ghana's Ministry of Information made a subtle pivot. They began highlighting Diaspora success stories, launching engagement portals, hosting forums abroad. A new phrase appeared on billboards, radio jingles, and social media feeds. Come home, build forward. But it wasn't government slogans that carried the spark. It was the people. In London, Ghanaian doctors formed a task force to open trauma centers in the north. In Alberta, engineers held a virtual summit about returning to improve irrigation systems in the Volta region. In New Jersey, a nurse shared a photo of her packed suitcase with the caption, "For good." This time, Burkina Faso didn't throw a celebration. It simply watched and welcomed. At the Diaspora Dome in Ouagadougou, new flags began appearing on the welcome wall, not as decoration, but as solidarity. Soon, a small regional coordination office opened, staffed by volunteers from Nigeria, Guinea, and Togo, all returnees themselves. There were no directives, just support. During a press briefing, a journalist asked Traore if he planned to export Burkina's model internationally. He shook his head slightly and answered with quiet conviction, "We didn't create a model, we remembered who we are. If others remember too, we will stand beside them." And others did. In Bamako, a grassroots effort called Marley Reconnect released its first campaign video, a montage of returnees arriving at airports, hugging family, opening new clinics. In Togo, a coalition of agricultural scientists came back to test ancestral seed varieties long abandoned. In Senegal, musicians and educators returned from Paris and Berlin to open schools where rhythm was taught before alphabet. And in Benin, the government surprised everyone. They fast-tracked land access for returnees and announced a pilot initiative modeled after Burkina Faso's Mission Renaissance. They called it simply Return en Route. A West African journalist gave it a name that stuck: the Quiet Revolution. No coups, no marches, no fiery speeches, just thousands of suitcases, thousands of minds, thousands of feet stepping off planes and into purpose. Western analysts scrambled to explain it away. A European think tank published a report warning that unmanaged repatriation could destabilize skilled labor flows, but nobody on the ground was listening. Instead, African talk shows debated return strategies. One panelist declared, "We're not rejecting the world, we're rejecting forgetfulness." Another countered, "This is not isolation, this is integration on our terms." At that month's African Union Summit, representatives from 5 nations gathered informally. No declarations signed, no logo stamped, just a circle of people meeting beneath a tree behind the compound. Someone called it the real assembly. No one disagreed. Back in Accra, a young girl who had just arrived from Manchester asked her grandfather what people meant by belonging. He smiled gently, pointed to her feet, and said, "When they feel the ground and stop moving." And across the continent, they were beginning to stop, not out of exhaustion, but out of conviction. The morning light over Ouagadougou was soft, spilling long shadows across the stone courtyard of the National Research Campus. It was quiet, reverent, even filled with the rustle of notebooks, the low hum of conversation, and the scratch of pencils moving in 3 different languages. Beneath a tall flagpole, the red, green, and gold of Burkina Faso rippled in the breeze. Around it, students in white coats, worn work boots, and colorful headscarves moved between lab stations. President Ibrahim Trayor walked alone through the grounds. No cameras, no entourage, no prepared remarks. Just him, walking among them as he passed. Students didn't rise or salute. They only looked up briefly, nodding with quiet respect. Respect earned, not demanded. He paused at a chemistry table where 2 girls were mixing herbal compounds. One had returned from Johannesburg, the other from Washington, D.C. Their accents were different, their laughter uneven, but the rhythm of their work was the same. Further ahead, 3 boys crouched over a piece of recycled cardboard, sketching out a wind-powered irrigation system. Their sneakers were torn, but their eyes gleamed with precision. Near the solar tech wing, coders huddled over an app designed to track food prices in local markets. A few feet away, A robotics group tested a handmade drone, meant to deliver medicine to flood zones. Then, from the biology wing, came a shout. "Captain, we made a cure." The voice was high-pitched, breaking with excitement. A girl no older than 12 sprinted forward, drowning in a lab coat far too big for her frame, her safety goggles fogged from running. She clutched a test tube like treasure, her pride lighting her face. Behind her, a teammate grinned as if the world had just opened its doors. Trayor stopped and turned. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The meaning of the moment was already clear. This wasn't staged. It wasn't for cameras or slogans. It was real. The future wasn't arriving someday. It was already here, in their hands, in their voices, in the certainty of a child who believed she could heal something, and did. As Traore continued walking, another voice seemed to rise, not spoken aloud, but carried in the silence of everyone present. We left because we had no choice. We returned because someone gave us one. From there, the view widened as if a camera pulled back. It panned past the innovation campus, past the shining dome, the clinics, the solar farms, the textile workshops, the open-air classrooms. It revealed streets lined not with banners or soldiers, but with families walking forward. Children clutched books, elders planted seedlings, nurses restocked rural shelves, engineers uploaded software into offline laptops. The diaspora hadn't come back just to visit. They had come back to build in villages. Neighbors once separated by distance spoke again, in dialects long buried under foreign years. At dusk, elders danced beneath solar lanterns. While musicians remixed traditional drum patterns with digital beats, cooperatives distributed seed packets of ancestral strains, corn, sorghum, fonio seeds that carried both memory and resilience. Clinics staffed by returning healthcare workers converted old school buildings into hubs with solar-powered refrigerators, storing vaccines for newborns who might not have survived a decade earlier. Engineers rebuilt bridges in remote valleys, using locally produced micro-robots, giving children paths to schools for the first time. Entrepreneurs launched mobile money systems on offline mesh networks, finally connecting border villages to banking. Every innovation felt personal. Every achievement felt continental. Young girls once told that technology wasn't meant for them, now ran coding boot camps with mentors who looked like them. Farmers who had spent lives bent in the fields now took evening classes at agro-tech centers, learning how to use data analytics to predict crop yields. Markets buzzed with crafts woven on solar-powered looms, patterns born from classrooms that blended tradition with invention. And pride wasn't just in infrastructure, it was in identity. Communities revived oral storytelling nights, teaching children to carry genealogical songs across generations. Schools began teaching African mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers alongside Newton and Pythagoras. History books were rewritten no longer centered on imperial maps, but on African kingdoms that once defined the world. Across borders, professionals met regularly under mango trees, sharing strategies with no need for approval from abroad. Ghana showed how to build trauma centers. Mali explained how to test heritage seeds. Burkina shared its coding curriculum. Together, they exchanged tools, ideas, and hope. This was a new Africa not waiting for rescue, not chasing validation. An Africa rebuilt on skills returned, stories remembered, and belief reclaimed. As the sun set behind the research campus, Burkina Faso's flag flew beside those of its neighbors, not as symbols of subservience, but as symbols of solidarity. The people hadn't returned for comfort. They had returned because, for the first time, someone believed they should, not a donor, not a savior, but one of their own. Trayor hadn't just welcomed them back. He had reminded them of who they were before the world asked them to forget. And perhaps that is the question left for all of us. If a leader rises not to be followed, but to make others stand taller, would you answer the call? Would you return? What part of this story lingers with you? What did Traore's courage stir in your heart? Do you recognize your own story, your own return hidden within theirs? Share your thoughts. Let this be a space where Africa speaks to itself honestly, proudly, unapologetically. If this story moved you, if it sparked belief, pass it on, like it, share it, keep this movement alive. Because Africa does not rise by asking, Africa rises by remembering, and then Africa returns.